Do you know there is one thing that you cannot get wrong when you are sculpting or drawing? Well, that one thing is proportions, because proportions are more mathematical, they are more numerical, and you actually cannot get them wrong. So, in this video, I am gonna try and just show you all possible proportions that I know, and yeah, proportions are just pretty awesome. You basically get everything right, and if you remember all of those basically, so we are just try to know all of that, and yeah, let's actually get started. So the idea is pretty simple. We are gonna be talking about the bigger proportions first, and then we are gonna get smaller and smaller. So you can see that I have a scan, I have a skull, and I have a cube, which is what we are gonna be using in order to learn about the proportions. So first thing first, I'm gonna go to my object properties and then go into my viewport display and then put the display at wire, so that I basically can just add as many edge loops and you would still be able to see all of that stuff. So yeah, let's actually get started. The first thing that you need to know is the skull basically is what gives you the proportion. So that's why we have the skull over here. And I'm not going to be talking about the muscles, by the way, just the proportion. That's why you can see that I only have the skull. So first thing first, you can see that the skull itself actually consists of two parts. The first one is this area and second one is this area. So you need to understand one thing, that the head itself is not spherical like this. And I know the drawing is pretty bad, so just ignore that. So basically now the first proportions that comes into mind is how wide this part should actually be. So yeah, this is going to be the first thing that we are going to be covering. And if you were to put the cube right over here, you just subdivide it in 6 parts. So if you were to add 5 loops, you're gonna be dividing it into 6 parts. And now just delete the first and the sixth. So this is basically how wide the head is supposed to be. So if you have a cube that is actually as long as your head, just divide the cube in 5 parts and delete the first and the sixth area, and you're going to get your width of the head. Now remember one thing, that the proportions that I'm talking about is actually an ideal proportion and it could vary from person to person. So if you have a reference where the proportions actually does not work, then it is totally fine. Everyone is different and you're going to find people that proportions basically just does not work with them. So these are the ideal proportions, and I'm going to be taking the screenshot, by the way, and pasting them in my pure ref file, so that you can just get this pure ref file. I'm going to put the link in the description to download this pure ref file. So the next thing would be to talk about the shape of head itself, and these are not proportions, but it is super important to remember. Well, the head is not spherical, it is kind of an egg-like shape where it is the broadest from here and thinnest from here. So you can see this direction. Always make sure when you are sculpting your head that you actually get this right. So whenever you are sculpting or drawing, make sure that you actually get this part right. And this is not proportionally, like it is not proportion related, but I think it is super important. So I've just talked about it. Now, if you were to put the cube right over here and just subdivide it by half, you're gonna realize that eyes basically comes at the middle of the head. This distance and this distance is actually the same. And do you know what? This whole distance is 24 centimeters. So when you are sculpting and you are basically creating a head, and again, this is ideal, make sure that you actually get this right. So these are basically the measurement of a real size head. So whenever you are sculpting, make sure that after you are done sculpting, or maybe when you are rendering, and you need to make sure that the head itself needs to be a real world scale. This is the real world scale. The head itself is actually supposed to be 24 centimeter long, and again it is ideal and can change from person to person. Okay, so the next thing is we need to divide the head into multiple parts so that we can see where the eyes are supposed to be, where the nose are supposed to be, where the lips are supposed to be. So in order to do that, just add 5 edge loops again, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as you can see, and then just delete the upper part. So just delete it. And now just remove all the edge loops that you have added and then add two edge loops. So right over here. And you can see that if you were to subdivide your head into three parts, 1, 2, 3, the bottom of the ears, again, this guy is not ideally accurate to the proportions, but this is where the top of the ears are supposed to be. And his ears are actually a little bit smaller, which is quite interesting. And this shows that everyone is different and it could actually vary a little bit. But ideally, if you are talking about an ideal proportion, then the top of the ears are going to be right over here. So the ears are going to be between the top of the eyebrow, like the eyebrow area, and then the bottom of the nose. So this is where the ears are supposed to be. And the bottom of the nose is where, like if you were to just subdivide it into three parts, you can clearly see this is where the bottom of the nose is, this is where the eyebrow is. And now let's talk about the lips. So for the lips, if you were to add two more subdivisions, you're going to realize that the corner of the mouth basically resides at the top part of the line, like this subdivision. So it does not come in the middle. Don't make the corner of the mouth in the middle and do that, like I'm just trying to create a lip. So don't do that. It comes on the top part of the third subdivisions. Okay, now we need to know the distance between the corner of the eyes, the width of the nose, and basically this width. So in order to do that, I am gonna be scaling down the cube to the width of the head, so approximately like this. And then let's actually start adding the edge loops, and I'm gonna be adding the 4 loops so that it divides the head into 5 areas. Now these are the 5 areas, and you can clearly see that the width of the nose is supposed to be right over here to the corner of the eyes. So if you were to just subdivide the head into 5 equal parts, you're going to realize that this part basically goes from this corner to this corner, and then the distance, like this distance, is actually the same to this distance, like the width of the nose. And it basically is just like the 5, I mean, you can clearly see right over here. I don't even really need to draw. So these are the distances. Whenever you are making your head, make sure that you actually get this right. Now, this is not the size of an eyeball. Don't mistake it with the size of an eyeball. The eyeball itself is going to be smaller, and I am going to be talking about that, so don't you worry about it. Well, the next thing would be the placement of the eyeball, and actually there is no measurement for it, but I can just talk about it. If you were to look at the skull, you must be thinking that this is where the eyeballs are supposed to be, in the center, right? Well, that's not the case. Actually, the eyeballs are supposed to be on the top part of your skull. So it kind of touches the upper area, and that's how you would also gonna be adding the eyeball. And the width of the eyeball is super important. The width of the eyeball is 24 millimeters. And if you were to just subdivide the eyeball into half, like this part is going to be your 12 millimeter wide. So the pupil itself is going to be half of what the eyeball is, and this is actually the measurement of the eyeball. So 24 millimeter, and eyeball itself is supposed to be on the top part of the skull, like top part of the eye socket area. So if you were to just look at him right over here, and if I were to just draw the eye socket, for example, something like this, you can like kind of measure it. You're gonna realize that if you were to look at this as a pupil, right? This is basically the eyeball, and I have drawn the eyeball a little bit bigger, but this is how big approximately the eyeball is supposed to be. So you can clearly see the eyeball is supposed to be on the upper part of the eye socket. Whenever you are, I think I've created the eye socket a little bit bigger, but you get the idea. The eyeball is supposed to be on the top part of the eye socket, and I've already talked about the measurement. So 24 millimeter and 14 centimeter. Now the next important thing is how wide, what should be the distance between the each eyeballs, because it is super important. I mean, technically with all the measurements that I have given you, you can just pretty easily figure out the distance, but I can still just give you the distance. So if you have two eyeballs right over here, right? I am not really drawing these good, by the way, but okay. So you have the eyeballs, and if you just put a dot in the center of the pupil, this distance is going to be 63 millimeters. And it could vary from person to person again, but I'm just giving you an ideal. Okay, one more important thing about the eyeball is if I were to just add a sphere and basically just scale it down and rotate it on the x-axis, and let's actually just extrude a pupil kind of a thing. We don't really need to be super accurate. Well, the eyeball does not actually look straight when a person is looking straight. There's always a deviation of approximately 5 degrees. So 2.5 to 5 degree. In this case, I'm going to just put the rotation at 5 degree. You can just look at it right over here, by the way. So you can see like right over here, you can see how much I'm rotating. So -5 is what I'm gonna just type, and this is actually the angle. So always make sure that you basically get this angle right, and I am gonna be drawing that actually. This angle right over here is supposed to be 5 degrees. So whenever you are creating your eyeball, make sure that you actually get this angle right. Okay, so let's look at what we've talked about, and this is the pure ref file. So we've talked about how much we need to scrap when we'll be creating the head, and the width of the head. This is not proportions, but it is something important that you need to remember. We know we've talked about that eyes basically comes at the middle of the head, and then if you were to just subdivide the face, not the head, the face in three parts. The upper part is going to be the forehead, and it is from where the eyebrows basically ends. And then the nose is going to be the nose and the ears. Actually, the nose and the ears are going to be your second part. And then if you were to divide the third part into three more divisions, then the upper part is where the lips are gonna be. And then we've talked about the width of the head. So the width of the eyes, the width of the nose is basically what we've talked about. If you were to divide your head into 5 parts, and then we talked about the placement of the eyes and how much the measurement of the eyeballs and everything, also the pupil, and we've also talked about the placement of the eyeballs. After that, yep, these are eyeballs actually. So we've talked about the difference between the pupil, the difference between the center of the pupil, and this center is after the rotation of 5 degrees. So make sure after you are done with the rotation, make sure that you basically get this right. So you can have multiple ways of measuring it. You can actually just put a cube right over here in order to measure. So these are all the stuff that we've talked about yet. And now we're going to be talking about the head from the side. Okay, so from side you can see the head is supposed to be a little bit smaller as it is from the top. So there is measurement for it. If I'm being honest, just make it a little bit smaller. All right, you can clearly see that we have a distance right over here and we have a distance right over here. So this distance is super small. So just eyeball it and you'll be able to just get it right. Okay, so the next important thing when we'll be looking at the head from the side is if you were to subdivide the head into half, this is where the ears are supposed to start. So this hole that you are seeing right over here is basically comes in the middle, and if you were to just look at the skull, this is basically where the whole of the ear is. So this part right over here is basically where the whole of the ear is, and if you were to just put this in half, that's where the ears are supposed to come. So yeah, it is super important, and I think I should have just talked about it. Okay, now we're gonna be talking about some angles, and those angles are actually super important. The first angle is the angle of the jaws. So you can see that it is not 90 degree, this is not how it is. There is an angle towards it, and make sure whenever you are sculpting your skull, you basically have less distance over here and then more distance over here. So don't create a line like this, right? Remember, there is always a difference in the distance. So make sure that you actually get this distance right, and there is an angle to it. So also get that angle correct. So yes, this is pretty much it. This video was only about the proportions and not the anatomy. Trust me, if it was about the anatomy, I would have covered a whole lot more. I would have covered a whole lot of volumes, but this was not the purpose of the video. And yeah, this is basically where I'm gonna be ending. So let's just see what we have. So we have this part, we have the widest part of the head, we have the subdivisions of the head in two areas and then the three areas, and then we've talked about the width, and then we've talked about the placement of the eyeball, and then we've talked about the distances between the eyeball, and then the rotation. Also make sure the jaw line is supposed to be at the right place. And we've talked about if you were to subdivide the head into two areas from the side, this is basically where the ears are gonna start from. So yeah, these are basically the proportions, and if you feel like that I missed out anything that I could have also covered in this video, then you can actually just ask me in the comment. And yeah, I am gonna just say bye bye.